Congenital amusia is a condition marked by a deficit in musical pitch perception, which starts at birth, and people with congenital amusia have a normal perception of speech and language, including the ability to recognize people by the sound of their voice. Individuals with this condition cannot, however, recognize tunes without the presence of lyrics, detect singing that is out of tune, and oftentimes have difficulty realizing the presence of irregular chords in classical music. Amusic people are also unable to detect pitch deviations less than one semitone when in a repeating tone sequence. And the disorder is a phenotype and it's observable, and overall, the disorder is congenital and not related to hearing loss, brain damage, intellectual deficits, or lack of exposure. So, the goal of the study was to further examine whether subjects experiencing congenital amusia have pitch memory deficits, and for this particular experiment, they manipulated interference and sequence length on pitch retention efficiency. For the subjects, experimenters matched 9 amusics with 9 control subjects according to age, gender, education, and musical training. The amusical participants displayed normal intellectual, memory, and language skills. In the first test, subjects compared two single tones spaced between a retention interval, which was 1,650 milliseconds, and a retention interval is some time between when a stimulus is given to the subject and then tested on. Out of 120 pairs of tones, half of them were identical, and the other half of the pairs differed between 1 and 3 tones. So for 24 of the trials, the retention interval was silent, and then for 96 of the trials, the retention interval consisted of distractor tones, and this was what was known as the interference condition. In the second test, which was a pitch sequence test, subjects had to determine whether two sequences of pitch were the same or different, and the sequences were separated by a silent 2-second retention interval. Again, half of the sequences were identical while the other half varied between 1 and 5 tones. And for the interference condition, there were 180 trials. The results from Task 1 showed that the amusic subjects performed more poorly compared to control subjects during the first task, and this was when the pitch difference was 1 tone or less. However, when the pitch difference was 2 or 3 tones off, amusics performed at the same level as the controls. And then during the interference trials, the amusic subjects performed more poorly than the controls again. In the second task, which was the pitch sequence task, amusics performed more poorly than the controls. However, the difference was not significant, as it was in the first task. To conclude, during both the single pitch comparison task and the pitch sequence test, amusics performed more poorly than the controls, and during the single tone task, amusics performed deficiently compared to controls, which is an indication of a perceptual pitch deficit. And the deficit was then heightened during the interference trial, which used the distraction tones. And finally, the results agree with previous findings, which state that the congenital amusia is characterized by a pitch memory issue.